The bitter winter wind cut through the lonely prairie as Clara Reynolds clutched her 3-month-old daughter against her chest, the thin blanket doing little to shield them from the biting cold. "Just a little longer, Emma," she whispered, her voice trembling as much as her frozen limbs. The abandoned homestead she'd stumbled upon at dusk provided walls but little warmth, its windows broken and door hanging precariously from rusted hinges. Montana Territory in 1876 was unforgiving to those without protection, especially a young widow with a baby and nowhere to go. Clara's tears froze on her cheeks as she rocked back and forth in the corner of the dilapidated cabin. Her husband James had been dead for barely 2 months, murdered by bandits on their journey west. She'd been forced to continue alone, their savings stolen, their dreams of a new beginning shattered. The baby whimpered against her chest, hungry and cold. "I know, sweet girl," Clara soothed, though her own stomach ached with emptiness. "We'll find something soon." But her words rang hollow in the empty cabin as the wind howled outside, a mournful sound that matched the despair in her heart. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made Clara's breath catch. She pulled further into the shadows, pressing her back against the rough wooden wall. Travelers at this hour could mean salvation or danger. The heavy footsteps on the creaking porch told her someone had dismounted. "Hello," a deep voice called out. "Anyone in here?" Clara remained silent, clutching Emma tighter as the baby began to fuss. The door pushed open further, and a tall silhouette filled the frame, lantern light spilling around his broad shoulders. "I don't mean any harm," the voice said, softer now. "Just looking for shelter from the storm that's coming." Emma's cry gave them away, a small, pitiful sound that cut through the stillness. The figure stepped inside, raising his lantern. Clara saw a man in his early 30s, with weather-worn features and kind eyes beneath the brim of his cowboy hat. His coat was dusted with snow, and his boots left wet prints on the floor as he approached cautiously. "Madam," he said, surprise evident in his voice when he saw her huddled in the corner. "I didn't expect to find anyone out here, especially not." His eyes fell to the bundle in her arms. Clara tensed, ready to run though she had nowhere to go. "Please," she whispered, "we won't trouble you, we'll leave at first light." The man set his lantern down on the floor and slowly removed his hat. "Name's Blake Thornton, madam. I own a ranch about 5 miles east of here." He kept his distance, seeming to understand her fear. "And you don't need to go anywhere in this weather. Storm's coming in fast, it'll be a blizzard by midnight." As if to confirm his words, the wind outside intensified, rattling the remaining glass in the windows. Clara shivered violently, and Emma's cries grew louder. Blake frowned, concern etching deeper lines around his eyes. "How long have you been here?" he asked, noticing her blue-tinged lips and the thin, inadequate blanket wrapped around the baby. "Since sunset," Clara admitted, her voice barely audible over the wind. Blake nodded once, decision made. "This place won't keep you alive through the night." He moved slowly, removing his heavy coat. "I've got a warm cabin, food, and a proper fire. You're welcome to shelter there until the storm passes." Clara hesitated, years of warnings about strangers warring with the desperate knowledge that her baby wouldn't survive the night in these conditions. Blake seemed to read her thoughts. He knelt down, still keeping a respectful distance, and held out his coat. "I'll keep my distance if that makes you feel safer, but please take this at least." When Clara didn't move, he laid the coat on the floor between them and backed away. "What's your name, madam?" "Clara," she said after a moment. "Clara Reynolds, and this is Emma." Blake nodded. "Mrs. Reynolds, I understand your caution, but that little one deserves a warm place tonight." He glanced at the howling darkness beyond the broken windows. "My mother would haunt me forever if I left a woman and baby to freeze when I could help." Emma's cries had turned to hiccuping sobs, her tiny body shivering despite Clara's efforts to warm her. That, more than anything, made Clara's decision. She reached for the coat, pulling it around both of them. The residual warmth from Blake's body and the heavy wool was immediate relief. "Thank you," she whispered. Blake nodded, a gentle smile touching his lips. "My horse can carry us both. It's not far, but we should hurry before the worst hits." Clara struggled to her feet, legs numb from cold and the hours of sitting. Blake moved as if to help her but stopped himself, letting her find her balance on her own. "I don't have much," Clara said, gesturing to the small bag beside her. "Just what I could carry when." She trailed off, the memories too painful. Blake picked up her bag without comment. "That's all right. We've got what you need at the ranch." Outside, the snow was falling more heavily, swirling in the lantern light. Blake's horse, a sturdy chestnut gelding, stood patiently by the porch, steam rising from its nostrils. "This is Buck," Blake said, patting the horse's neck. "He's strong enough for the three of us." He secured Clara's bag, then turned to her. "May I help you up?" Clara nodded, clutching Emma tightly as Blake's strong hands encircled her waist, lifting her onto the saddle with surprising gentleness. He mounted behind her, careful to maintain a respectful distance while still providing support. "I'll keep you both warm," he promised quietly, reaching around to gather the reins. "Just lean back against me if you need to. It's a rough ride in this weather." As they set off into the swirling snow, Clara found herself doing just that, the solid warmth of Blake's chest a reassuring presence against her back. Emma quieted, nestled securely between them. "Thank you," Clara whispered again, the words carried away by the wind. Blake's reply rumbled through his chest against her back. "Just hold on tight. I'll keep you both warm, I promise." The journey to Blake's ranch was a blur of swirling snow and biting wind. Clara lost track of time, focusing only on keeping Emma protected against her chest while Blake guided them through the worsening storm. His arms formed a protective barrier around her, and despite her wariness, she found herself grateful for his steady presence. "Almost there," Blake called over the howling wind. Clara could just make out the faint glow of lamplight ahead through the curtain of snow. They approached a modest cabin with a barn alongside it, smoke curling from the chimney despite the wind's attempts to tear it away. Blake dismounted first, then reached up to help Clara down. Her legs nearly buckled when her feet touched the ground, numb from cold and the tension of the ride. "Easy now," Blake said, steadying her with a hand at her elbow. "Let's get you both inside." He led Buck to the barn first, promising to return quickly to tend to him properly. Then he guided Clara to the cabin door, pushing it open to reveal a simple but welcoming interior. The heat from the stone fireplace hit her like a physical force, bringing tears to her frost-numbed cheeks. "Sit by the fire," Blake instructed, pulling a rocking chair closer to the hearth. "I'll heat some soup." Clara sank gratefully into the chair, unwrapping Emma from her blanket to check on her. The baby's cheeks were pink again in the firelight, her eyes blinking sleepily. "She's beautiful," Blake commented as he stoked the fire higher, adding another log. "How old?" 3 months, Clara replied, her voice hoarse from the cold. "Born just before we left Illinois." Blake nodded, moving to a cast-iron stove in the corner of the one-room cabin. "I've got some vegetable soup from yesterday. It'll warm you up quick." Clara looked around the cabin while Blake worked. Despite its modest size, it was clean and well-maintained. A bed stood against one wall, covered with a patchwork quilt. Shelves held books, surprisingly many for a ranch cabin. A small table with 2 chairs sat near the stove, and various tools of ranch life hung neatly on the walls. "You live here alone?" she asked, then immediately regretted the personal question, but Blake just nodded. 5 years now, built it myself when I started the ranch." He stirred the pot of soup. "It's not much, but it's mine." "It's wonderful," Clara said sincerely. After weeks on the trail and the terrifying hours in the abandoned homestead, the snug cabin seemed like a palace. Blake brought her a steaming bowl of soup and a chunk of bread. "Eat." "You need your strength." Clara shifted Emma to one arm, accepting the food with her free hand. The rich aroma made her stomach clench with hunger. She hadn't eaten since morning a few stale crackers from her dwindling supplies. "Thank you for your kindness," she said before taking a spoonful. The warm soup spread through her like liquid gold, and she couldn't help the small sound of pleasure that escaped her. Blake busied himself at the stove, giving her privacy to eat. "There's more if you want it," he said, "and I can make up a pallet for you by the fire." "You and the little one can take the bed." Clara paused, spoon halfway to her mouth. "I couldn't possibly take your bed. You can and you will," Blake replied firmly. "A lady and a baby need proper rest." His tone brooked no argument. As she finished her soup, Emma began to fuss, making hungry noises of her own. Clara felt her face flush with embarrassment. "I need to feed her," she said quietly. Blake immediately stood. "I'll go check on Buck and bring in more firewood. Take your time." He pulled on his coat and stepped outside without further comment, his consideration bringing fresh tears to Clara's eyes. By the time Blake returned, dusted with fresh snow and carrying an armload of logs, Clara had fed Emma and was gently rocking her to sleep. "She doing all right?" he asked, carefully stacking the wood by the fireplace. Clara nodded. "She's resilient, more than I am sometimes." Blake removed his coat and hung it by the door. "Children often are." He hesitated before asking, "Where are you headed, Mrs. Reynolds, if you don't mind my asking?" The question brought reality crashing back. Clara looked down at Emma's peaceful face. "I don't know any more," she admitted, her voice breaking. "My husband and I were going to Oregon. We had plans to start a farm there, but James was killed by bandits 6 weeks ago near Cheyenne. They took everything of value, our money, our horses, our supplies." Blake's expression darkened. "I'm sorry, that's a terrible thing to happen to anyone, especially." He gestured to Emma. "I've been making my way as best I can since then. Taking odd jobs in towns, moving west because I don't know what else to do." Clara wiped a tear with the back of her hand. "The last place I worked was a laundry in a mining town about 30 miles back, but the owner's wife didn't like having Emma there." Blake sat in the chair opposite hers. "And that's how you ended up in that abandoned homestead?" Clara nodded. "I was hoping to reach the next town before nightfall, but the weather turned and we needed shelter." Blake was silent for a long moment, staring into the fire. "The nearest town is Helena, and it's 20 miles from here. Even in good weather, that's not an easy journey on foot with a baby." "We've managed so far," Clara said, though her voice lacked conviction. "Winter's just beginning," Blake said gently, "and it's fierce in these parts." The reality of her situation settled over Clara like a heavy blanket. She had no money, no transportation, and a baby depending on her. The odds of making it to Oregon or even surviving the winter were slim. "I don't know what to do," she whispered, voicing her deepest fear. Blake leaned forward, his expression serious. "You don't have to decide tonight. The storm's likely to keep us snowed in for a few days anyway. You and Emma are welcome to stay here until you figure out your next step." Clara studied his face, looking for any sign of ulterior motives, but found only sincerity. "Why would you do that for strangers?" Blake's gaze drifted to the window, where snow continued to fall heavily. "I know what it's like to be alone in a harsh place." He turned back to her. "And no one should face a Montana winter without help, especially not a mother and child." Emma had fallen asleep in Clara's arms, her tiny features relaxed in the firelight. Looking down at her daughter, Clara knew she couldn't risk her safety out of pride or fear. "Thank you," she said simply. "We'll try not to be a burden." Blake stood, stretching his tall frame. "You're no burden, Mrs. Reynolds. Now let me show you to the bed. You both need proper rest." That night, lying under Blake's warm quilt with Emma nestled beside her, Clara listened to the storm raging outside and the occasional creak of the floorboards as Blake moved around, adding wood to the fire. For the first time since James died, she felt something besides grief and fear. It wasn't happiness, not yet, but perhaps the fragile beginning of hope. Morning came with blinding whiteness. Clara woke to find Blake already up, cooking breakfast over the stove. Emma was awake but quiet, staring up at the unfamiliar ceiling with wide eyes. "Good morning," Blake said, noticing her stirring. "Hope you slept well. Storm's still going, but I managed to get to the barn to check on the livestock." Clara sat up, smoothing her wrinkled dress. "How bad is it?" "Worst December storm I've seen in years," Blake replied, sliding eggs onto 2 plates. "We're properly snowed in. Might be a few days before the trails are passable." Instead of anxiety, Clara felt a strange relief. A few days of safety, of warmth and food seemed like an unimaginable luxury. "I can help around the cabin," she offered, rising and gathering Emma in her arms. "Cook, clean, I want to earn our keep." Blake placed the plates on the small table. "You don't need to earn anything, but I won't turn down help." He gave her a small smile. "Especially if you can cook better than I can, which wouldn't be difficult." Over breakfast, Blake told Clara about his ranch, 10 acres with a small herd of cattle, 2 milk cows, some chickens, and his horses. He'd come west from Pennsylvania after the war, looking for a fresh start away from the memories of battle. "Never married?" Clara asked, then blushed at her forwardness. Blake shook his head. "Came close once, but she wasn't keen on ranch life, went back east after one winter." He shrugged, but Clara sensed an old hurt there. "What about you? How did you meet your husband?" Clara smiled at the memory. "James was a school teacher in my town. I was working at the general store when he came in looking for books. He started coming in every week, always with some question only I could help with." Her smile faded. "We were married 3 years before Emma came along. He was so happy to be a father." Blake nodded, understanding in his eyes. "He'd be proud of how you've protected her." The days of the storm passed in a strange, peaceful rhythm. Blake tended to his animals, clearing paths through the snow to the barn and chicken coop. Clara kept the cabin, cooking meals that made Blake raise his eyebrows in appreciation. "Been a long time since I've had home cooking like this," he commented on the third evening, finishing a stew Clara had made from venison he'd preserved and vegetables from his root cellar. "Been a long time since I've had a proper kitchen," Clara replied. Emma lay in a makeshift cradle Blake had fashioned from a wooden crate lined with soft blankets. As they washed the dishes together, their hands occasionally brushing, Clara found herself studying Blake's profile. He was handsome in a rugged way, with lines at the corners of his eyes that deepened when he smiled. His hands were calloused but gentle, and she'd seen that gentleness in how he handled Emma when Clara asked him to hold her while she kneaded bread dough. On the fourth morning, Clara woke to sunshine streaming through the windows. The storm had finally passed, leaving behind a transformed landscape of pristine white drifts. "Trail to town should be clear in a day or two," Blake said as they stood at the window, admiring the glittering expanse. "I can take you to Helena then, if that's where you want to go." The prospect of leaving the safety of the cabin and Blake's protection sent a chill through Clara that had nothing to do with the snow outside. "What would I do there?" she asked quietly. Blake leaned against the window frame. "There's work, I suppose, laundry, cooking at the hotel, but with the baby." He trailed off, both of them knowing how difficult it would be. "I can't impose on you any longer," Clara said, though every part of her wished to stay. "It's not an imposition," Blake said quickly. "In fact." He hesitated, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I could use help around here. The ranch is more than one person can manage properly. I've been thinking of hiring someone, but most men around here want to mine for gold, not tend cattle." Clara looked up at him, hope fluttering in her chest. "Are you offering me a job?" Blake nodded. "Room and board for you and Emma, plus a small wage. You could save for Oregon if that's still where you want to go." He gestured around the cabin. "It's not much, but it's safe, and I've been thinking about building an addition, another room. You and Emma could have more space." It was more than generous, and they both knew it. Clara studied his face, looking for any sign that the offer came with expectations she couldn't meet. Blake seemed to read her thoughts. "Just help with the ranch, nothing more. You'd have your privacy and my respect, I give you my word." Clara looked down at Emma, who was contentedly playing with a wooden spoon Blake had given her. The idea of a stable home, even temporarily, was almost too good to believe. "I don't know much about ranching," she admitted. Blake smiled. "You know about keeping a home, which is what this place hasn't had in years, and you can learn the rest. I'm a patient teacher." Clara took a deep breath. "Then I accept, Mr. Thornton. Thank you, Blake," he corrected gently. "If we're going to be working together, I think we can use first names." "Blake," Clara repeated, feeling a strange flutter in her chest as she said it. His smile deepened. "Welcome to Thornton Ranch, Clara." The winter months passed with surprising quickness as Clara settled into life at the ranch. True to his word, Blake began building an addition to the cabin as soon as the weather permitted, creating a small bedroom for Clara and Emma that adjoined the main room. In the meantime, he insisted on keeping his pallet by the fire, refusing to hear any arguments about Clara giving up the bed. Clara learned the rhythms of ranch life, how to milk the cows, tend the chickens, and even help with the cattle when needed. Blake was indeed a patient teacher, never showing frustration when she made mistakes. Emma thrived in the stable environment, growing stronger each day. She began to crawl by February, scooting across the cabin floor with determined concentration that made both adults laugh. "She's got your determination," Blake commented one evening as they watched Emma attempting to pull herself up on a chair leg. "And her father's curiosity," Clara replied, a bittersweet smile touching her lips. James would have been drawing pictures of her every day, documenting each new skill. Blake nodded thoughtfully. "You must miss him terribly." "I do," Clara said honestly, "but it's different now. The pain isn't as sharp." She looked around the cozy cabin. "Having a safe place, knowing Emma is cared for, it helps." "I'm glad," Blake said softly. Their eyes met across the room, and something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement of the comfortable companionship that had grown during their months together. March brought the first signs of spring, with patches of grass appearing as the snow receded. The cattle needed more attention as calving season approached, and Blake spent long days checking the herd. "You don't have to wait supper for me," he told Clara one evening as he prepared to go out for a final check of a heifer that looked close to delivery. "I don't mind," Clara replied, bouncing Emma on her hip. At 6 months old, the baby was becoming more interactive, babbling and reaching for things that caught her interest, including Blake's hat, which he often let her pat when he returned from outside. Blake paused at the door, watching them with an expression Clara couldn't quite decipher. "You've made this place a home," he said abruptly. "I didn't realize how empty it was until you filled it." Before Clara could respond, he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. That night, sitting alone by the fire after Emma was asleep, Clara admitted to herself what she'd been avoiding for weeks. She was falling in love with Blake Thornton. His kindness, his gentle strength, the way he looked at Emma as if she were precious, all of it had worked its way into Clara's heart despite her initial wariness. But what did Blake feel? He was unfailingly considerate, but he never crossed the line of propriety. Was it just his nature, or was he keeping his distance out of respect for her grief? The possibility that he might see her only as an employee and a responsibility made her heart ache. When Blake returned, exhausted but pleased with the healthy calf delivered under his watchful eye, Clara had his supper waiting. They ate in comfortable silence, but she felt his gaze on her more than once. "Spring brings more work," he said finally. "But it's good to see the land coming alive again," Clara nodded. "I've been thinking about planting a vegetable garden. The soil near the south side of the cabin looks good." "It is," Blake confirmed. "My mother always kept a garden there when I was young, before she passed." It was the first time he'd mentioned his mother directly, though Clara knew from bits of conversation that his parents had started the ranch before both died from influenza when Blake was in his 20s. "You must miss them," she said softly. Blake nodded, his expression distant. "Every day. But like you said about James, the pain changes. It becomes part of you rather than consuming you." He looked up, meeting her eyes. "Having you and Emma here, it reminds me of when this was truly a family home." Clara's heart quickened. "I'm glad we could bring that back for you." Blake hesitated, then reached across the table, his hand stopping just short of hers. "Clara, I've been wanting to ask." A sharp cry from Emma's room interrupted him. Clara rose immediately, recognizing the sound of her daughter waking from a nightmare. By the time she had soothed Emma back to sleep, Blake had cleared the table and was preparing for bed, the moment lost. As April turned the landscape green and brought wildflowers to the prairie, Clara found herself watching Blake with increasing awareness. The way his shoulders moved as he chopped wood, the gentleness of his hands as he showed her how to check a chicken for eggs, the rare but transformative smile that appeared when Emma reached for him, all of it filled her with longing she hadn't felt since James was alive. The guilt came too swift and sharp. Was it disloyal to feel this way? James had been dead barely 6 months, but in the harsh reality of the frontier, Clara knew that life moved forward relentlessly. Many widows remarried quickly out of necessity. Not that marriage was what Blake had in mind, she reminded herself firmly. For all she knew, he saw her merely as a convenient housekeeper and nothing more. The answer came unexpectedly, on a warm evening in late April. Blake had been in Helena for supplies, his first trip to town since the winter storms. Clara had spent the day cleaning the cabin thoroughly and preparing a special supper, trying not to examine too closely why she wanted everything perfect for his return. When Blake's wagon appeared on the horizon, Clara smoothed her hair and straightened her apron, Emma balanced on her hip. The baby had begun to recognize the sound of Blake's approach and would bounce excitedly whenever he appeared. "Look, Emma," Clara said, pointing to the approaching wagon. "Blake is home, home." The word slipped out naturally and Clara didn't correct herself. This was home now in a way no place had been since she'd left Illinois. Blake pulled the wagon to a stop, his face breaking into a wide smile when he saw them waiting. "There's my favorite welcoming committee," he called, jumping down from the seat. Emma squealed and reached for him, a reaction that never failed to light up Blake's face. He approached them, removing his hat as he always did. "Did you miss me?" He asked, the question directed at Emma but his eyes on Clara. "We both did," Clara admitted, her cheeks warming under his gaze. Blake reached out, letting Emma grab his finger with her tiny hand. "I brought something for each of you." He turned back to the wagon, retrieving a small package wrapped in brown paper. "This is for the little lady." Clara unwrapped it to find a beautifully carved wooden rattle, polished smooth with tiny bells inside that jingled softly. Emma immediately reached for it, her eyes wide with delight. "It's beautiful," Clara said. "You didn't need to, I wanted to," Blake interrupted. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a smaller package. "And this is for you." Clara shifted Emma to free a hand, accepting the package with curious fingers. Unwrapping it revealed a small book of poetry, its leather cover worn but well cared for. "I noticed you looking at my books sometimes," Blake explained, suddenly seeming uncertain. "This was my mother's favorite. I thought you might enjoy it." Clara ran her fingers over the embossed title. "Poems by Emily Dickinson." She looked up at him, touched beyond words by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "Thank you, Blake. I'll treasure it." Something in her expression seemed to give Blake courage. He stepped closer, his voice dropping so only she could hear. "Clara, I've been wanting to talk to you about something." Her heart quickened. "Yes, these past months, having you and Emma here," he paused, searching for words. "It's changed everything. I never expected to find a family again, but that's what you've become to me." Clara's breath caught. "Blake, let me finish, please," he said gently. "I know it hasn't been long since you lost James. I know you came here out of necessity, not choice. And I know you had plans for Oregon that don't include staying on a small Montana ranch forever." He took a deep breath. "But I've fallen in love with you, Clara, with both of you. And if you need more time, I understand. If you want to continue west eventually, I understand that too. But I wanted you to know that if you ever could see a future here with me, I would spend every day trying to make you and Emma happy." Tears filled Clara's eyes, not of grief but of overwhelming emotion. "Oh, Blake," she whispered, "I've been afraid to admit it, even to myself, but I've fallen in love with you too." The joy that transformed his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "You have," Clara nodded. "You gave us shelter when we had none, asked for nothing in return, and showed us both such kindness. How could I not love you?" Blake reached out, gently touching her cheek. "May I kiss you, Clara?" In answer, she rose on tiptoes, meeting his lips with hers. The kiss was gentle, tentative at first, then deepening with the emotions they'd both kept contained for so long. Emma, caught between them, patted Blake's chest with her rattle, making them both laugh as they separated. "I think she approves," Blake said, his eyes shining. Clara smiled through her tears. "She's loved you from the beginning." Blake looked at them both, his expression solemn despite his joy. "I want to do this properly. Will you marry me, Clara? Let me be a father to Emma." "Yes," Clara answered without hesitation. "Yes to both." As the sun set over the Montana prairie, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Blake wrapped his arms around Clara and Emma, holding them close against the cooling evening air. "I promised I'd keep you both warm forever," he whispered against Clara's hair. "And I mean to keep that promise." Clara leaned into his embrace, feeling the solid strength of him against her back, the same protective presence she'd felt that first night on his horse in the blizzard. But now there was so much more trust, friendship, and love that had grown steadily through the winter into this perfect spring moment. "I believe you," she whispered back, "and we'll keep you warm too." Their wedding took place in early June when the prairie was awash with wildflowers. Blake rode to Helena to bring back the circuit preacher, and word spread quickly among the scattered neighbors. What Clara had expected to be a simple ceremony turned into a community celebration, with ranching families traveling from miles around to attend. "Everyone's been curious about who's been keeping Blake Thornton company all winter," explained Martha Wilson, wife of a neighboring rancher, as she helped Clara prepare for the ceremony. "He's kept to himself for years. When he rode into town asking for the preacher and grinning like he'd struck gold, well, the news traveled faster than a prairie fire." Clara blushed, smoothing the skirt of her dress, a new one Blake had insisted on ordering from Helena. The pale blue fabric complemented her eyes, and Martha had helped arrange her honey-brown hair with wildflowers woven into the braids. "You look beautiful, dear," Martha assured her, adjusting Emma's little white dress. At 8 months old, Emma was sitting up strongly and babbling constantly, as if trying to join the conversation. And this little angel is going to steal the show. Outside, beneath an arch of twisted branches Blake had constructed and decorated with flowers, the small gathering waited. Clara's heart pounded as Martha handed Emma to her and prepared to escort them both outside. Blake stood waiting, looking more handsome than Clara had ever seen him in a new shirt and polished boots. His face when he saw her walking toward him made every hardship of the past year fade away. There was only this moment, this man, and the future they would build together. The preacher's words were traditional and brief, but when it came time for the vows, Blake had something of his own to add. "Clara," he said, his voice clear enough for all to hear, "when I found you and Emma that winter night, I made a promise to keep you warm. Today I expand that promise to keep you safe, to cherish you both all my days, to build a home and a life worthy of the gift you've given me by becoming my family." There wasn't a dry eye among the women present, and more than a few of the men cleared their throats gruffly. Clara's own response was simple but heartfelt, promising to love him faithfully and help build the home they both dreamed of. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Blake kissed her with such tenderness that Clara felt her heart might burst with happiness. Emma, balanced on Clara's hip, reached for Blake's face, patting his cheek as if blessing the union herself. The celebration continued into the evening with food and music and dancing in the yard. Blake had built a proper table outside, and the neighbors had brought dishes to share: fried chicken, cornbread, apple pies, and a cake Martha had made specially for the occasion. As dusk fell, lanterns were lit around the yard, casting a golden glow over the festivities. Blake found Clara sitting with Emma, who was growing tired after all the excitement. "Mrs. Thornton," he said, the new name making Clara smile, "may I have this dance before our daughter falls asleep, our daughter?" The words filled Clara with indescribable joy. Blake had already begun the legal process to adopt Emma, insisting that she should have his name and all the rights of his child. "I'd be honored, Mr. Thornton," Clara replied, letting him take Emma into his strong arms. Blake held the sleepy baby against his shoulder with one arm and wrapped the other around Clara's waist. They swayed gently to the fiddle music, a family complete. "Happy?" Blake asked softly. Clara looked up at him, at this man who had saved them from the cold and given them so much more than shelter. "More than I ever thought possible again," she answered truthfully. Later, after the guests had departed and Emma was asleep in her cradle in the new bedroom Blake had built, husband and wife stood on the porch of their cabin, looking out at the star-filled Montana sky. "I never finished telling you that night," Blake said, his arm around Clara's waist. "When I found you in that abandoned homestead, shaking with cold and holding Emma so tight something changed in me. I'd been existing, not living, for so long. You both woke me up." Clara leaned her head against his shoulder. "You saved our lives." "And you saved mine," he replied simply. Even before I knew I loved you, I knew you were meant to be here." The years that followed brought changes to Thornton Ranch. Blake's careful management and Clara's practical support helped the small operation grow steadily. They added more cattle, expanded the garden into a productive plot that yielded vegetables for preserving, and even planted an apple orchard that Blake promised would bear fruit by the time Emma's old enough to climb the trees. Emma grew from a baby to a toddler, following Blake around the ranch with adoring eyes and calling him Papa with such natural ease that sometimes Clara forgot she wasn't born his daughter. Blake's love for the child was boundless. He carved her toys, taught her the names of the animals, and read to her every night before bed. In their second year of marriage, Clara discovered she was expecting. Blake's joy was tempered with concern for her health, and he fussed over her so much that Clara finally had to gently remind him she wasn't made of china. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time," she told him with a smile. "And I've done it before, remember." But Blake's protective nature couldn't be entirely suppressed. He hired a young man from Helena to help with the ranch work so he could spend more time near the cabin, and he rode to fetch Martha Wilson when Clara's time drew near. Benjamin James Thornton was born on a crisp autumn morning, a sturdy boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's blue eyes. Emma, now almost 2, was fascinated by her baby brother, peering into his cradle and solemnly reporting to Blake, baby sleeping or baby crying as the situation warranted. Watching Blake hold his son for the first time, tears unashamedly tracking down his weathered cheeks, Clara felt her heart expand with love for this family they had created together. "He's perfect," Blake whispered, carefully tracing a finger over the baby's tiny features. "Just like his mama." "And his sister," Clara added, smiling at Emma, who was leaning against Blake's knee, watching her brother with intense concentration. Blake nodded, looking at the little girl with as much love as he showed the newborn. "My family," he said, his voice filled with wonder. "My complete family." But life on the frontier was never entirely predictable or safe. When Benjamin was 6 months old and Emma approaching 3, a late winter storm swept in unexpectedly, catching Blake far from the cabin as he checked on a section of fence that had been damaged by elk. Clara watched the weather worsen with growing concern, stoking the fire higher and trying to distract herself by playing with Emma while Benjamin napped. When the baby woke hungry, she nursed him near the window, straining to see through the swirling snow for any sign of Blake. "Where Papa?" Emma asked, pressing her small face against the cold glass. "He'll be home soon," Clara assured her, praying it was true. "The snow is making it hard to see, that's all." As darkness fell with no sign of Blake, Clara's worry deepened into fear. She knew the dangers of being caught in a Montana blizzard all too well. It was how she and Blake had met. The thought that he might be lost in the storm, possibly injured, was almost unbearable. Clara put both children to bed in their room, then kept vigil by the fire, stepping onto the porch every half hour to call Blake's name, her voice swallowed by the howling wind. She remembered her own desperate situation the previous winter alone, freezing with a baby depending on her, and understood with terrible clarity what Blake might be facing. Just after midnight, when Clara had begun to consider the unthinkable that she might need to somehow get the children to a neighbor's farm for help, she heard a sound at the door. It swung open to reveal Blake, covered in snow, his face pale with cold but very much alive. "Blake." Clara cried, rushing to him. Thank God, he stumbled inside, and Clara saw he was limping badly. "Horse slipped on ice," he explained through chattering teeth. "Fell and rolled on my leg, had to leave him and walk the last mile." Clara helped him to a chair by the fire, pulling off his frozen boots and outer clothes. His right ankle was swollen and discolored, clearly sprained if not broken. "You could have frozen to death," she said, tears of relief and residual fear filling her eyes as she wrapped him in blankets. Blake caught her hand, his fingers painfully cold against hers. "Couldn't do that to you and the children," he said simply. "Kept thinking of you all waiting, kept me going." Clara prepared hot coffee laced with whiskey, helping Blake drink it while she examined his injury more carefully. You need a doctor, but that's impossible until the storm passes. Blake nodded grimly. Just wrap it tight for now, I'll be all right. Clara did as he asked, binding the ankle firmly with strips of cloth. The horse, safe in a sheltered spot near the creek bend. I'll send Danny for him when the weather clears. Danny was the young ranch hand who lived in a small cabin near the barn. I was so afraid, Clara admitted as she worked. I kept thinking about that night you found me and Emma, how close we came to. She couldn't finish the sentence. Blake touched her cheek, his hand warmer now. But I did find you, and you were waiting for me tonight. That's what matters. Clara leaned into his touch. When I thought you might be lost in the storm, I realized all over again how much I love you, how much we all need you. I'm not going anywhere, Blake promised. Except maybe to bed with your help. I'm not sure I can manage on my own. Clara helped him stand, supporting his weight as they made their way to their bedroom. Once he was settled, she checked on the children, both still sleeping peacefully, unaware of the night's drama, before returning to her husband's side. Blake's injury kept him confined to the cabin for weeks, testing his patience but giving him unexpected time with the children. Emma delighted in helping her papa, bringing him books and toys, while Benjamin learned to crawl during this period, often using Blake's outstretched legs as a climbing apparatus. Clara divided her time between caring for Blake and the children and handling essential ranch tasks with Danny's help. By the time spring arrived and Blake could move around with just a slight limp, Clara had developed a new confidence in her abilities as a rancher's wife. You're remarkable, Blake told her one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset while the children played at their feet. Running the ranch, caring for the children, looking after me, and never once complaining, Clara smiled, leaning against his shoulder. This is our home, our life. We do what needs doing. She looked up at him. Besides, I was just returning the favor. You kept us warm that first winter. I was keeping you safe this time. Blake pulled her closer. Partners then, in all things, Clara agreed, sealing the promise with a kiss. The years passed, marking their lives with the natural rhythms of the seasons and the milestones of their growing family. Emma started school in Helena, staying with Martha Wilson during the week and returning home eagerly for weekends, full of stories and new knowledge. Benjamin grew into a sturdy boy with his father's love of the land and his mother's quiet determination. When Emma was 8 and Benjamin 5, Clara gave birth to their third child, a daughter they named Sarah Grace, with wispy blonde hair and a smile that appeared almost from her first day. Blake was as enchanted with his second daughter as he had been with his first 2 children, declaring her the perfect completion to our family. By the 10th anniversary of the night Blake had found Clara and Emma in the abandoned homestead, Thornton Ranch had grown into one of the most prosperous in the region. The original cabin had been expanded into a proper house with 4 bedrooms, a large kitchen, and a parlor where Clara taught the children their lessons when weather prevented them from attending school in town. On that anniversary, after the children were asleep, Blake brought out a special bottle of wine he'd been saving and poured 2 glasses. 10 years, he said, handing one to Clara. Sometimes it feels like yesterday I found you, and sometimes it feels like you've always been here. Clara smiled, accepting the glass. At 32, she was still as beautiful to Blake as she'd been at 22, though motherhood and ranch life had added character to her features and streaks of silver to her hair. The best 10 years of my life, she said honestly. Though not without challenges. Blake nodded, thinking of the difficult seasons they'd weathered together: droughts, harsh winters, a fire that had nearly taken the barn, Emma's dangerous fever when she was 6. Through it all, their partnership had only strengthened. I have something for you, he said, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a small velvet pouch and placed it in her hand. I've been working on it for months. Clara opened the pouch, gasping softly when a necklace slid into her palm, a delicate silver chain with 3 small pendants, a star, a sun, and a moon. The children helped design it, Blake explained. Emma chose the star for herself, Benjamin the sun, and we decided the moon would represent Sarah. It's beautiful, Clara whispered, tears filling her eyes. Blake took the necklace and fastened it around her neck. "They're your sky," he said softly. "And you're their earth, the foundation of everything." Clara touched the pendants reverently. "What about you?" Blake smiled, taking her hand. "I'm just the fortunate man who gets to orbit in your presence." He kissed her fingers. "The lucky cowboy who promised to keep you warm and found his own heart thawed in return." Clara rose from her chair and moved to sit in his lap, a familiar position from their years together. "You've given me so much more than warmth, Blake Thornton." "As have you, Clara Thornton," he replied, his arms encircling her waist. "A home, a family, a life filled with love." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the fires glow and listening to the quiet sounds of their sleeping children through the open doorway. Outside, the Montana night spread its star-filled canopy over their home, the same stars that had witnessed their beginning 10 years before. "I never made it to Oregon," Clara mused after a while, her head resting on Blake's shoulder. Blake chuckled softly. "Disappointed?" Clara smiled, thinking of the life they'd built together, the thriving ranch, their beautiful children, the community they'd become part of, and the love that had grown stronger with each passing year. "Not for a single moment," she answered truthfully. "This is exactly where I was meant to be." Blake kissed her then, a kiss filled with the deep, abiding love of a decade shared and the promise of many more years to come. When they parted, his eyes held hers with the same tenderness she'd seen that first night when he'd promised to keep her warm. "Welcome home, Clara," he whispered, the words an echo from their past and a blessing on their future. "Welcome home." 20 years after Blake found Clara and Emma in that abandoned homestead, Thornton Ranch had become one of the most respected in Montana. The original 10 acres had expanded to over 100, with a herd of cattle that produced some of the finest stock in the territory. The small cabin was now the heart of a sprawling ranch house, surrounded by barns, corrals, and bunkhouses for the hands they employed. Emma, at 23, had grown into a capable young woman with her mother's kindness and her adoptive father's steady resolve. Though she had opportunities to marry, she chose instead to teach at the schoolhouse in Helena, riding home to the ranch on weekends just as she had as a child. "I'm waiting for someone who looks at me the way Papa looks at you," she told Clara one summer evening as they sat on the porch shelling peas. "Someone who'll keep me warm forever like he promised you." Clara smiled, remembering the desperate young widow she'd been and the life Blake had offered when she had nothing. "You'll find him," she assured her daughter, "or he'll find you just as your father found us." Benjamin, at 20, had his father's build and love of ranching. He worked alongside Blake every day, learning every aspect of the business he would someday inherit. Watching them ride out together each morning, matched in stride and purpose, filled Clara with quiet pride. Sarah, their youngest at 15, was a sunbeam of a girl who filled the house with music and laughter. She had Clara's artistic nature and spent hours drawing the landscape and animals of the ranch. Blake, now in his 50s, had weathered into a distinguished figure, his dark hair liberally streaked with silver, laugh lines permanently etched around his eyes. To Clara, he was more handsome than ever, carrying the confidence of a man who had built something lasting from raw possibility. And Clara herself had flourished in this life they'd created together. The frightened young mother had become a respected rancher's wife, known throughout the region for her wisdom, hospitality, and the preserves and quilts she donated annually to the church bazaar in Helena. On the 20th anniversary of the night that had changed their lives, Blake surprised Clara by arranging for all 3 children to be home together, a rare occurrence now that Emma lived primarily in town and Benjamin often traveled to cattle auctions. "A family dinner," he announced that morning. "Just the 5 of us, like old times." Clara spent the day preparing Blake's favorite foods, while Sarah decorated the dining room with wildflowers, and Emma helped set the table with the good china they used only for special occasions. Benjamin and Blake handled the evening chores early, ensuring they would have uninterrupted family time. As they gathered around the table that evening, Clara looked at the faces of her loved ones and felt her heart swell with gratitude. Blake, at the head of the table, caught her eye and smiled, the same smile that had warmed her from the inside that first night when hope seemed lost. "Before we eat," Blake said, raising his glass, "I want to propose a toast." He looked around the table, his expression solemn but his eyes bright. 20 years ago tonight, I found something precious in an abandoned homestead, a brave young woman and her baby girl shivering in the cold. Emma smiled, though she had no memory of that night herself, having heard the story throughout her childhood. "I made a promise then," Blake continued, "to keep them both warm forever. It was the best promise I ever made and the one I've been most blessed to keep." He raised his glass higher. "To Clara, who made a home of my house and a family of my solitude. To our children, who fill our lives with purpose and joy, and to 20 more years of warmth and love. To family," they all echoed, glasses touching in the center of the table. As they enjoyed the meal, sharing stories and laughter, Clara found herself watching Blake, still amazed after all these years by the depth of her love for him. He caught her gaze and winked, a private communication that needed no words after 2 decades together. Later, after the dishes were cleared and the children had retired to their rooms, Blake took Clara's hand and led her outside. The Montana night was warm, stars scattered like diamonds across the velvet sky. "Walk with me," he asked, and Clara nodded, slipping her arm through his. They strolled to the rise behind the house, a spot that offered a view of the entire ranch, the buildings illuminated by lamplight, the cattle quiet in the pastures, the distant mountains silhouetted against the starry sky. "Sometimes I still can't believe this is our life," Blake said, his arm around Clara's waist. "That night when I found you, I was just looking for shelter from a storm. I had no idea I was riding toward my future." Clara leaned against him, remembering the desperate fear she'd felt that night and the cautious hope that had come with Blake's promise. "You saved us," she said simply, "and then you loved us." "Loving you was the easy part," Blake replied, turning to face her. In the moonlight, his eyes held the same tenderness they had the first time he'd kissed her. "Being worthy of your love that's been my life's work." Clara reached up to touch his face, tracing the familiar lines with gentle fingers. "You've succeeded beyond measure, Blake Thornton." He caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. "Do you ever regret not making it to Oregon?" It was a question he asked occasionally over the years, always with the same underlying uncertainty, as if even after all this time he feared she might have wanted a different life. Clara's answer was always the same and always true. "Never. This ranch, this life with you, it's better than any dream I had before." She smiled up at him. "Besides, I think we've built something here that even Oregon couldn't match," Blake nodded, looking out over their land. "We have it that." He pulled her closer. "I promise to keep you warm forever, but you've given me so much more warmth in return." As they stood together under the vast Montana sky, Clara thought of the journey that had brought them here, the pain and loss that had led her to that abandoned homestead, the storm that had brought Blake to her door, and the love that had grown from that desperate beginning into this rich, full life. "Forever isn't over yet," she whispered, rising on tiptoes to kiss him. "We're still keeping each other warm." Blake's arms tightened around her, his kiss a promise renewed with the depth of 20 years' fulfillment behind it. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers, their breath mingling in the night air. "Forever won't be long enough," he said softly, "but I'll take every day we're given, grateful for each one." Hand in hand, they walked back toward the house that had grown from a simple cabin to a home filled with love, laughter, and the warmth of family, the greatest shelter either of them could have imagined on that cold winter night when their story began. The light from their windows spilled onto the porch, guiding them home just as Blake had guided Clara and Emma to safety all those years ago, and just as their love had guided them through every season since. Inside waited the family they had built together, the legacy of a promise kept through 20 years of joy and challenge, hardship and happiness. A promise to keep each other warm, forever fulfilled in every moment they shared, and renewed with each sunrise over the Montana land they both cherished. Forever, Clara thought as Blake opened the door for her, wasn't just a length of time. It was this home, this love, this life they'd created from nothing but hope and determination. It was the warmth they'd found in each other that bitter winter night, a warmth that had only grown stronger with each passing year. And as they stepped back into their home together, Clara knew with absolute certainty that some promises, once made and kept with love, truly did last forever.